As your project progresses, there'll come a time when you need to begin sharing your model with other folks on the design team, be they internal members of the design team working in the same firm as you or outside consultants at other firms. Now, some of those firms will be working in Revit, and some of them will be working in other programs. Let's assume that your MEP engineer is working in Revit and you want to prepare your model and get it ready to send off to them so they can start doing the engineering work. Well, that means that since most of their work is going to involve the ceiling, you might want to get your ceiling plan up to date before you send it off to them. So in this movie, I'd like to look at the process of adding ceilings and lights to your model. So I'm in a file called Ceilings and Lights, and I'm currently in the level 1 floor plan. And I'm just going to come down here on the project browser and make sure that I'm working in a ceiling plan instead. So I'm going to come over here and open up level 2 ceiling plan. Let's zoom in a little bit. And we're going to add a ceiling in this big open space right here. Now, we're just going to focus on the basic steps of the process, and we're not going to get too carried away with making a terribly elaborate ceiling. So this will be a fairly basic ceiling that we're going to create here. Okay, so the first step is to just add the ceiling object. So we're going to come up to the Architecture tab and click on the Ceiling tool. The default behavior for the ceiling object is to automatically generate the shape of the ceiling from the surrounding walls. So if you notice that my cursor currently has the circle with the line through it, what this is basically telling me is that there's no enclosed boundary. If you look down at the status bar at the bottom of the screen, it says click in an area bounded by walls to create the ceiling. So notice that if I move my mouse into this enclosed area, that suddenly it finds the boundary surrounded by those walls. This is what the automatic ceiling option is doing. If ever you want to create a ceiling that's not bounded by wall shapes, you can go to the sketch ceiling option instead. But in this example, I'm going to stick with the automatic ceiling. Now, before I click in here, I want to check the settings over on the Properties palette. So over here on the Properties palette, you can see that we have a couple different types of ceiling that we can choose from. We have a 2x2, a 2x4 acoustical tile, and a 5/8 drywall ceiling. Now, I'm going to choose the 2x2 acoustical tile ceiling for this example. It's going to constrain that ceiling to level 2 since we're in the level 2 reflected ceiling plan, and it's got a height that it's going to set that ceiling at relative to level 2. Now, I'm going to drop this height down a little bit to 10 feet and press enter. Now, remember, 10 feet is really only going to be on this left side of the plan right here where the balcony is. Over here on the right side, we have a double volume space. And so the ceiling will actually be much taller over there. Now, you can just highlight the space and just click anywhere, and that will create the ceiling. Now, we just need the one ceiling, so I'm going to go ahead and click the Modify tool to cancel out of there. And if you move your mouse back into the ceiling, notice that each one of these little grid lines here actually highlights on screen. Now, you can select any grid line and shift the grid pattern if necessary. So let's say you wanted to shift the whole pattern over one tile or half a tile or something like that. You could simply use the move command to do that. Revit centers it in the space as best it can by default, but you can always move it later if you don't like it. You can also rotate it. So let's say that I wanted the ceiling to be rotated like that. All you have to do is use the rotate command and pick your angle, and it will rotate the entire grid. I'm going to undo that and stick with the rectilinear grid. So those are certainly options that you can do to modify the ceiling. So I'm going to stick with the basic ceiling here, and then the next thing I'm going to do is start adding light fixtures. Now, the light fixture is just another component family in Revit, which means that we use the component button to add them. So I'm going to click on component, and over here on the properties palette, I'll scroll through the list, and down here toward the bottom, I have a Troffer light lens lamp that I can add. So I'm going to add the Troffer light lens, and I'm going to do the 2x4 2-lamp 120-volt unit. So there it is right there. And notice that again, I get the circle with the line through it. If you look at the status bar this time, it's telling me to click on a ceiling to place an instance. So this is a ceiling-hosted light fixture. So the only way you can add it is if there's a ceiling underneath your cursor. So I'm just going to sort of move over here somewhere, and I'm going to place it roughly in this location here down by the corner of the screen. Now, I'm going to just place one because I'm going to use my modify tools, move, copy, rotate, align, things like that, to position and create multiples. So I just need the one. I'll cancel out of the command with the modify tool or press escape twice. The next thing I want to do is zoom in on this general location, And I'd like this first light to be about 3 tiles away from both walls. So I really need this corner to be right here. Now, I could use the move command or the align command for this. If you want to use the align command, you'd go to modify, click on align. You'd pick the grid line you want to line up with, and then the edge of the light fixture. If you prefer to use move, you can just select the light fixture, go to move, snap right to that endpoint, and then snap it down to the intersection. Align command, move command, doesn't make a difference. As long as you get the light fixture snapped directly into that location, it should be fine. Now, I'm going to zoom out slightly here, and we could go to copy next, make sure that multiple is turned on, pick a base point, and then just count tiles. So if I want to make sure that I'm leaving 4 tiles in between, I can put the next one right there, and then 4 tiles in between, and the next one right there, and 4 tiles in between, and the next one right there. That does a pretty good job. Now, that's fine to create those first 4 that way, but I wouldn't want to then go create 4 more and then 4 more. That would be awfully tedious. So what I want to do is cancel out of that command. Make sure you're not clicking on a grid, but click in one of the empty spaces here and hold the mouse down and start to drag. Now, when you drag from left to right, we call that a window selection. And a window selection has to completely surround the objects that you're selecting. If you don't completely surround them, they're not selected. But if you do, they get completely selected. Now, if you go right to left, it's a different kind of selection, and it will grab too much stuff. So this is why you want to make sure that you're going from left to right and select only the 4 light fixtures. Now, if you prefer, you can hold the control key down and click each of the 4. At this point, I could go back to copy and pick my base point and my new point, or I could use array. Array is a multiple copy command, and there's a few ways we can use the array command, but array might be a faster way to create copies of these lights across the entire ceiling plane. So I have my 4 lights selected, and then I'm going to click the array button right here. And if we look at the options bar, there's a lot of settings that we can use with the array command. So it can be either a linear or radial array. I want to make sure that we're choosing linear. We can group and associate the array, which means that you'll be able to later make changes to the array and it will update accordingly. Or you can do a one-time multiple copy using the array. So basically the difference is if you've got that box checked, you create a parametric array that you can manipulate ongoing anytime, even after you've closed the file and reopened it. If you uncheck that box, you're doing a one-time multiple copy. Now, in this case, all I really need is a one-time multiple copy. So I'm going to uncheck group and associate. You want to put your quantity in here. So how many items do I want? If you look at your plan here and you do a quick count, I should be able to fit about 8 rows of lights. So I'm going to put 8 in there. And then the move to is asking about the points you're going to click on screen. You're going to click point 1 and point 2. Is point 1 and 2 representing the distance to the second row, or is it representing the distance to the final row? In this case, it's going to be the second row, I think, is going to be easier to click. So I'm going to choose that. And then as a further failsafe, if you want to, clicking constrain will force your cursor to only move horizontally or vertically. So if I click that, it keeps me from accidentally moving off at a diagonal. Now let me zoom in a little bit here, and I'm going to pick my start point right there. And then I want 3 tiles in between, 1, 2, 3, which means my end point is right there. And when I click, it will create the series of copies, and each of the next series of copies is another 3 tiles away. And if I zoom all the way out, you can see that my 8 rows of lights completely fill in the available space. So creating a ceiling layout first involves creating the actual ceiling plane because you require the host for your light fixtures. So you start with your ceiling plane. It can have a pattern for the 2x2 tile, or it can be just a plain drywall ceiling. So you can have any material you want applied to it. And then adding light fixtures is just a simple component family. You add them in, and then using your modify tools, things like copy and array and rotate, is how you position multiple lights throughout the plan. So you can make very short work of the task of creating your typical reflected ceiling plan.